I'm Abigail, 34 female. I live in a quiet suburb that feels a million miles away from the steel and glass of the city, even though it's only a 30-minute drive. For my entire adult life, my world has revolved around one thing: Blackwood Industries, the manufacturing company my grandfather, Theodore Blackwood, built from the ground up. As the operations manager, I was the one who knew the machinery, the logistics, and the people who made the company breathe. But I was about to learn that the family I dedicated my life to was planning to cut me out, sell my grandfather's legacy for parts, and leave me with nothing but the dust of my own hard work. They thought I was just a cog in the machine, easily replaced. They had no idea my grandfather had left me the master switch. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Life at Blackwood Industries had a certain rhythm, a familiar hum of machinery and purpose that I had known since I was a child. My grandfather, Theodore, used to walk me through the factory floor, his large hand enveloping mine, the scent of machine oil and hot metal a comforting perfume. He'd point to the massive presses and lathes, not as cold, unfeeling machines, but as partners in creation. "They have their own language, Abby," he'd say, his voice a low rumble. "Listen, and they'll tell you what they need." I learned that language. I learned it better than anyone. After he passed, I poured my grief and my inheritance of knowledge into the company. I wasn't just working a job, I was honoring a memory, carrying a torch. My father, Harrison, had stepped into the CEO role, and my older brother, Leo, a man who saw everything in terms of profit and loss, became the CFO. On the surface, we were the perfect picture of a family dynasty, poised to take my grandfather's legacy into the next generation. It was a beautiful picture, but the frame was a cage, and I was just beginning to feel the bars. The change was subtle at first. It started with closed-door meetings. Meetings I, as operations manager, should have been a part of. When I'd ask Leo about them, he would wave a dismissive hand. "Just high-level financial strategy, Abby, nothing that concerns the factory floor." His smile was smooth, practiced, the kind he used on investors, not his own sister. My father was even more evasive. He'd clap me on the shoulder, his touch feeling more like a restraint than an affirmation. "You're doing brilliant work keeping the engine running, Abigail. Let us handle the boring paperwork." They spoke of my role as the engine room of the company, a vital but ultimately subordinate function. They were the captains on the bridge, steering the ship. I was the one below deck, covered in grease, unaware of the iceberg they were steering us directly into. I tried to ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. This was my family. Paranoia was a luxury I couldn't afford, an emotion that felt like a betrayal in itself. So I worked harder. I streamlined our production lines, negotiated better deals with our material suppliers, and improved workplace safety, boosting morale and efficiency. The numbers reflected my efforts. Our output was up 15% year-over-year, and operational costs were down by 8%. I presented these figures at our quarterly review, expecting praise, or at least acknowledgement. Instead, I was met with polite, vacant smiles. Harrison and Leo exchanged a look I couldn't decipher, a silent conversation that excluded me completely. "Good work," my father said, the words feeling hollow. "Keep it up." That was it. No questions, no discussion, just a pat on the head before they moved on to Leo's financial projections, which were filled with vague terms like asset liquidation and strategic restructuring. My only real confidant within the company was Eleanor Vance. She had been my grandfather's most trusted accountant and had stayed on after his passing, a quiet pillar of integrity in a company that was starting to feel morally adrift. Eleanor was in her early 50s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a loyalty to my grandfather's vision that was absolute. One afternoon, I stopped by her office, a small, meticulously organized space filled with the comforting scent of old paper and Earl Grey tea. "Eleanor, am I going crazy?" I asked, slumping into the chair opposite her desk. "Leo and my father, they're icing me out. Something S going on." Eleanor stopped typing, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She took off her reading glasses and looked at me, her expression unreadable. Your grandfather always said you had the best instincts in the family, Abigail. He said you felt the company's heartbeat. She didn't confirm my fears, but she didn't deny them either. Her careful neutrality was, in its own way, a blaring alarm. She knew so. Mething, but her loyalty was complex. She served the company and my father was its legal head. Her hands were tied. Just be careful, she added, her voice barely a whisper. Not all business is good business. The cryptic warning sent a shiver down my spine. I left her office with more questions than answers, the sense of dread solidifying in my chest. I started paying closer attention, reading emails more carefully, listening to the silences in conversations. The picture that began to emerge was terrifying. Leo was in constant contact with a competitor, a corporate behemoth called Omnicorp, known for buying up smaller companies, stripping them of their assets, and firing everyone. Why would the CFO of Blackwood Industries be in talks with a vulture like that? I tried to tell myself there could be a benign explanation. A partnership, perhaps, a technology sharing agreement. But the secrecy, the exclusion, the vague corporate speak, it all pointed to something far more sinister. The gilded cage was shrinking, and I was beginning to realize that the people I trusted most were the ones holding the key, preparing to lock it for good and walk away. My world, the legacy I had sworn to protect, was being sold out from under me by my own blood. I just didn't have the proof yet. The end came faster than I could have ever imagined. It happened on a Tuesday, a day that began with the mundane rhythm of production schedules and logistics meetings. The air was thick with the smell of summer rain and hot asphalt. I was in the middle of resolving a supply chain issue with a vendor when my father's assistant appeared at my office door, her expression tight and uncomfortable. "Mr. Blackwood requests your presence in the main conference room immediately," she said, avoiding my eyes. "Your father and brother are waiting." The formality was a red flag. He was no longer your father. He was Mr. Blackwood. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. This was it. The other shoe was about to drop. I walked the long hallway to the conference room, the portraits of the company's history lining the walls. There was my grandfather, Theodore, breaking ground on the first factory, his face full of hope and determination. There he was again, shaking hands with the governor. And there I was, a teenager in a hard hat, beaming beside him. These walls told a story of family, of legacy. I was about to be written out of it. When I entered the room, the atmosphere was glacial. My father, Harrison, sat at the head of the massive oak table, his posture ramrod straight, his face a mask of stern authority. My brother, Leo, sat to his right, fidgeting with a high-end pen, a smug, almost imperceptible smirk on his lips. Across from them sat a man I didn't recognize, a sharp suit, expensive haircut, and the predatory eyes of a shark. "Abigail, thank you for joining us," my father began, his voice devoid of any warmth. "This is Mr. Thorne from Omnicorp." My blood ran cold. Omnicorp, the corporate vulture. My worst fears were being realized right in front of me. I remained standing, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "What is this about?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. My father cleared his throat, a sound that seemed to echo in the silent room. "We've come to an agreement. Omnicorp is acquiring Blackwood Industries. The deal is finalized." The words hit me like a physical blow. Finalized, I was the operations manager. I was a Blackwood. How could a deal of this magnitude be finalized without my knowledge, let alone my consent? "You're selling the company?" I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "Grandfather's company?" Leo spoke up then, his tone dripping with condescension. "It's a fantastic deal, Abby. We're getting a premium valuation. It's what's best for the business." "Best for the business?" I shot back, my voice rising. "Omnicorp will gut this place. They'll fire everyone, sell our patents, and turn this factory into a warehouse. You know their reputation?" "That's not our concern," Harrison said flatly. "Our concern is maximizing shareholder value. This is a business decision." The phrase shareholder value was the dagger. He was no longer my father, he was a CEO. Leo was no longer my brother, he was a CFO, and I was just an obstacle. "I am a shareholder," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and grief. "I own a piece of this company. You can't do this without me." Leo laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Oh, Abby, you're 10%, it's sweet, but it's not significant. Dad and I control the majority of the voting shares. We voted this morning." The motion passed. He leaned back in his chair, the picture of arrogance. They had planned it all. The secret meetings, the exclusion, the vague language, it was all a calculated strategy to push me out before I could interfere. The man from Omnicorp, Mr. Thorne, had been silent until now. He spoke with a chillingly smooth voice. "As part of the acquisition, there will be a full restructuring of management. Your position, Ms. Blackwood, has been deemed redundant." Redundant. That was the word they used to erase my life's work. 34 years of my life, my entire identity, reduced to a single, sterile corporate term. I stared at my father, pleading with my eyes for him to show some flicker of familial loyalty, some sign that this was hurting him, too. I found nothing. His eyes were cold, distant. He had already moved on. "Your services will no longer be required, effective immediately," Harrison stated. "Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings. A severance package will be messengered to your home." I was stunned into silence. Fired, from my own family's company, by my own father and brother. Security? They were treating me like a common criminal, a threat. The betrayal was so absolute, so profound, it felt like the floor had dropped out from beneath me. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. A strange, terrifying calm washed over me. I looked from my father's emotionless face to my brother's triumphant smirk. "I see," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "I understand completely." I turned without another word and walked out of the conference room, leaving them to their deal with the devil. As the door clicked shut behind me, the sound of their muted conversation was like dirt being shoveled onto a coffin. My coffin. My career, my identity, my connection to my grandfather, they had just buried it all. 2 security guards, men I'd known by name for years, flanked me as I walked back to my office. Their faces were etched with pity and embarrassment, but they had their orders. The walk of shame was excruciating. Colleagues and employees I had worked with, mentored, and supported for over a decade averted their gaze, pretending to be absorbed in their work. The news was clearly already spreading through the corporate grapevine. I was no longer Abigail Blackwood, the boss's daughter, the capable operations manager. I was a ghost, an outcast haunting the halls of my own history. My office, which had always been my sanctuary, now felt alien and hostile. It was a space filled with memories that were suddenly tainted. The photos on my desk, me and my grandfather at the company picnic, me and Leo as kids playing with toy trucks that looked like our company's fleet, now seemed like relics from a false history, props in a play where I was the only one who didn't know my lines. A cardboard box sat on my desk, a final, impersonal insult. I was expected to pack up 15 years of my life into a single, flimsy container. My hands moved on autopilot, a numb, mechanical process. I took down the framed production awards, the blueprints for a factory expansion I had designed, the little potted plant Aliner had given me. Each item was a fresh stab of pain. I felt a hollow ache in my chest, a grief so profound it was almost silent. I wasn't just losing a job, I was losing a part of myself. I was losing my grandfather all over again. My brother and father thought they had won. They had the votes, the power, the deal with Omnicorp. They saw me as a sentimental fool, too attached to the past to see their brilliant, profitable future. They had underestimated me. They had forgotten who raised me. My grandfather, Theodore, was a brilliant engineer and a shrewd businessman, but above all, he was a planner. He believed in contingencies, in fail-safes. He taught me to play chess, and his favorite lesson was to always think 5 moves ahead. "Never let your opponent see your queen until it's time for checkmate," he used to say. As I started to clear out my desk drawers, my fingers brushed against a thick, leather-bound folder tucked away at the very back, hidden beneath old manuals and stacks of stationery. I didn't even remember putting it there. It was heavy, made of rich, dark brown leather, with the initials TB embossed in gold on the cover. Theodore Blackwood. My heart skipped a beat. With trembling hands, I pulled it out and placed it on the desk. A fine layer of dust coated the top. I blew it away and opened the cover. Inside was a single, multi-page document bound by a blue legal ribbon. The paper was thick, aged to a cream color, and covered in dense, formal type. The title at the top read, Blackwood Industries Original Partnership and Succession Agreement. It was dated the year I turned 18. I scanned the document, my eyes flying across the legal jargon. It was the original founding agreement, laying out the share structure of the company. I saw my grandfather's signature, bold and confident at the bottom. I saw my father's, smaller and more hesitant. And then I saw my own, the looping, uncertain script of an 18-year-old girl who had no idea what she was signing. My grandfather had sat me down in his study that day. He had told me it was a formality, something to ensure the company stayed in the family. He said, "This is about the future, Abby." Your future. I had trusted him implicitly and signed where he pointed, eager to please him, to be a part of his world. I remembered the moment, but I had never truly understood the significance. Now, as a 34-year-old woman who had just been betrayed by her family, I read the words with a lawyer's focus. My eyes landed on a specific clause, Section 4, subsection B, transfer of controlling interest. The paragraph stated that upon my 18th birthday, Theodore Blackwood would transfer a portion of his personal shares to me. I kept reading, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't just a few shares. It wasn't a token amount. The document clearly, unequivocally, stated that he was bequeathing to me 51% of the company's total voting shares, to be held in a silent trust until such a time as I either assumed a leadership role or in the event of a hostile takeover attempt or sale of the company. 51%, a controlling interest. I wasn't a minority shareholder with a sentimental 10%. I was the majority owner. I was the one in charge. The document was a ghost, an echo from the past. My grandfather from beyond the grave had just handed me a weapon, a nuclear weapon. He had known all those years ago. He must have seen the seeds of my father's ambition and my brother's greed. He must have known that one day they might try to sell his legacy for scrap, and he had put this in place, this masterstroke of planning, as the ultimate fail-safe. He had made me the guardian of his life's work, and I hadn't even known it. The security guard coughed lightly by the door. "Ma'am, are you almost finished?" I looked up from the document, my eyes shining with something that wasn't tears. It was fire. The shock and grief were being burned away by a surge of pure, cold adrenaline. "Yes," I said, my voice dangerously calm as I carefully slid the leather folder into my personal bag. "I believe I am." They thought they were kicking me out. They had no idea they had just forced me to find the keys to the entire kingdom. The drive home was a blur. My hands were gripped so tightly on the steering wheel that my knuckles were white. The leather-bound folder sat on the passenger seat, radiating a warmth that felt like my grandfather's presence. It was one thing to find the document, it was another to understand its power, and more importantly, its legitimacy. My father and brother were arrogant, but they weren't stupid. They would have their own lawyers, their own paperwork. They clearly believed they held all the cards. I had to assume they were unaware of this agreement's existence. It was my only explanation for their brazen confidence. My grandfather must have set it up with his personal attorney, keeping it off the official corporate books that Harrison and Leo would have scrutinized. It was a ghost in the machine, a secret waiting for the right moment to materialize. The moment I got home, I spread the document across my dining room table. The legal language was dense, but the core of it was crystal clear. The 51% share was mine. The agreement stipulated it was an irrevocable transfer. It was ironclad, but I needed confirmation. I needed a legal expert, and I couldn't just walk into any law firm. This required discretion and, above all, loyalty. My mind immediately went to one person, David Chen. David had been a junior lawyer at the firm that represented my grandfather for decades. He was now a senior partner, a sharp, no-nonsense corporate lawyer who revered my grandfather. Theodore had been his mentor. If anyone would help me navigate this and honor the original intent of the document, it was David. I called him, my voice tight with urgency. "David, it's Abigail Blackwood. I need to see you. It's about my grandfather." The gravity in my tone must have been obvious because he cleared his schedule immediately. We met that evening at his quiet, book-lined office downtown. I placed the leather folder on his polished mahogany desk. "My father and brother fired me today," I said, the words still tasting like ash. "They're selling Blackwood Industries to Omni Corp." David's face hardened. He had no love for corporate raiders. He opened the folder and began to read, his eyes scanning the pages with practiced speed. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the soft rustle of aging paper. He read it once, then went back to the beginning and read it again, this time much more slowly, his finger tracing key lines. Finally, he looked up at me, a slow, incredulous smile spreading across his face. "Abigail," he said, his voice filled with awe, "this is a masterpiece. Your grandfather." He was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. He confirmed my hopes. The document was legitimate, notarized, and filed correctly with the state at the time of its creation. The trust it established was a separate legal entity, meaning its holdings wouldn't appear in the standard corporate S. Hair registry that Leo would have access to. It was designed to be invisible. "They have no idea this exists," David stated, more as a fact than a question. "None," I confirmed. "They think I'm a 10% shareholder they can just push aside." David leaned forward, his expression turning serious. "This changes everything. The sale to Omnicorp is null and void. Any vote taken without the majority shareholders' consent is legally meaningless. Abigail, you don't just have a seat at the table. You are the table." The validation sent a wave of relief and power through me, but David was quick to temper my excitement with strategy. "We can't just storm in there and wave this document around. They'll fight it. They'll try to bury us in litigation, claim it's a forgery, or argue you're incompetent. We need more than just the agreement. We need to know exactly what they've done." He was right. I needed to understand the full scope of their deceit. I needed evidence of their intentions, proof that this sale wasn't in the company's best interest but in their own. My mind went back to Alina Vance, the loyal accountant. She had been cryptic, but her warning was clear. She knew things. The next morning, I called her on her personal cell phone, bypassing the company lines I knew would be monitored. I asked to meet her for coffee, far away from the office. We met at a small, anonymous cafe. She looked nervous, glancing around as if she expected my father to materialize from the shadows. "I heard what they did," she said, her voice low and laced with sympathy. "It's wrong, Abigail." "I know, Alina," I said, leaning in. "And I think it's worse than just selling the company. I think they've been manipulating things for a while. You once told me my grandfather said I could feel the company's heartbeat. Well, right now, it feels sick. You see everything that goes through the books. What's been happening?" Alina hesitated, her loyalty at war with her conscience. I decided to take a gamble. I slid a copy of my grandfather's agreement across the table. Her eyes widened as she read the key paragraph about the 51% share. The color drained from her face, then returned with a look of dawning realization and fierce resolve. My grandfather's authority, even in death, was absolute to her. "Theodore," she whispered. "That brilliant man." Her hesitation vanished. "They've been running a shadow ledger," she confessed, her voice barely audible. "For the past year, Leo has been diverting funds to a new holding company registered in Delaware. He's been undervaluing our assets on the official books, writing off state-of-the-art machinery as depreciated to make the company look less profitable than it is. It's a classic strategy to lower the company's valuation for a private sale, avoid taxes, and pocket the difference on the side. The deal with Omnicorp isn't just a sale, it's a heist." She explained that my father and brother stood to make millions from the official sale, and millions more from the offshore holding company that Omnicorp would pay off separately. It was a scheme designed to defraud the company, the tax authorities, and me. They weren't just selling my grandfather's legacy, they were gutting its corpse for parts before the funeral. "Can you get me proof?" I asked, my heart pounding. "The real ledgers." "The communications with Omnicorp?" Alina nodded, her decision made. "I have copies of everything on a secure, encrypted drive for my own protection. I knew this day might come." My grandfather's echo had led me to the truth. Now, with Alina's whispers from the ledgers, I had the ammunition I needed. This was no longer just about stopping a sale. This was about exposing a fraud. Armed with the original agreement and Alina's explosive financial evidence, I felt like a different person. The grief and shock that had paralyzed me were replaced by a cold, sharp-edged clarity. I was no longer the victim. I was the majority shareholder, the sleeping giant my father and brother had foolishly decided to poke, and I was about to wake up. For the next week, David Chen and I worked in secret, operating out of a temporary office space he rented under a different name. We were a two-person war room, fueled by coffee and a shared sense of righteous fury. Eleanor, our invaluable inside source, would discreetly pass us information on encrypted thumb drives, providing a real-time view into the company's fraudulent last rites. David meticulously built our legal case. He drafted injunctions to halt the Omnicorp sale, prepared breach of fiduciary duty claims against my father and brother, and compiled a detailed report of their financial crimes to be presented to the board, and, if necessary, the authorities. The beauty of this, David explained, gesturing to a whiteboard covered in legal strategy, is that we don't have to prove the agreement is valid. The burden of proof is on them to prove it's not. And given that it's a notarized document, from 30 years ago, created by the company's founder, that's a mountain they won't be able to climb. My role was to plan the confrontation. A simple legal letter wouldn't do. This needed to be a public reckoning. My father and brother had humiliated me in front of my colleagues. I would reclaim my authority in the same arena. Their power was built on an illusion of control, and I was going to shatter it in one decisive move. The plan was simple, but audacious. We discovered that Harrison and Leo had scheduled a final pre-acquisition, all-hands meeting in 2 days. They intended to formally announce the sale to the employees, framing it as a great new chapter for the company. Mr. Thorne from Omnicorp would be there to deliver a speech full of empty promises about job security and a bright future. This meeting was their victory lap. It was going to be their public execution. We timed our move perfectly. David would file the emergency injunction with the court an hour before the meeting was set to begin. This would legally freeze the entire Omnicorp deal, but the news wouldn't reach my father and brother in time. They would walk into that meeting completely unaware that their multi-million-dollar scheme had already been dismantled. While David handled the legal filings, I prepared for the meeting itself. I spent hours poring over Eleanor's data, the falsified asset reports, the emails between Leo and Omnicorp's acquisition team, the wire transfer records to their shell company. I wasn't just going to tell them I was in charge. I was going to show every single employee how the CEO and CFO had been systematically robbing the company they claimed to be saving. The night before the meeting, a wave of doubt washed over me. I sat in my quiet house, the legal documents spread out on my table, and wondered if I was doing the right thing. This wasn't just a corporate takeover. This was a declaration of war against my own family. I was about to destroy my father and brother, not just professionally, but personally. Could I do that? Then, I thought about the hundreds of employees who would lose their jobs. I thought about the families who depended on Blackwood Industries, people whose faces and names I knew. I thought about my grandfather, his hands calloused from work, his eyes bright with pride as he looked over the factory floor. He hadn't built this company for Harrison's greed or Leo's ego. He built it to last. He built it for us. My doubt hardened back into resolve. This wasn't just revenge. It was justice. It was my duty. The morning of the meeting, I dressed with purpose, not in my usual practical work attire, but in a sharp, dark gray suit that screamed authority. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman my grandfather would be proud of. There was no fear in my eyes, only determination. David called me at 9:00 a.m. sharp. "It's filed," he said. "The injunction is active. The deal is frozen. They just don't know it yet." "Thank you, David," I replied. "I'll see you in the boardroom." He wasn't just my lawyer anymore. He was a trusted ally. Eleanor had also confirmed she would be at the meeting, seated in the back, a silent witness to the coming storm. I drove to Blackwood Industries, but I didn't park in the visitor's lot. I parked in the spot reserved for the CEO, my father's spot. It was a small, symbolic act, but it felt momentous. I walked through the main entrance, my head held high. The receptionist's eyes widened in shock as I strode past her desk without stopping. People in the hallways stared, whispering as I passed. The ghost had returned, and she was no longer content to haunt the building. I made my way not to the large auditorium where the all-hands meeting was being held, but to the executive boardroom that adjoined it. David was already there, waiting for me, a briefcase full of legal documents at his side. The plan was to let my father and brother begin their presentation, to let them spin their web of lies in front of the entire company. Then, at the perfect moment, we would walk in and correct the record. They had orchestrated my humiliation in a conference room. I would orchestrate their downfall in front of everyone. The sleeping giant was awake, and she was ready to reclaim her kingdom. The auditorium was packed. Every employee, from the factory floor to the executive suite, had been summoned to hear the exciting news. I stood with David in the adjoining boardroom, watching the proceedings on a closed-circuit television feed. The mood in the room was a mixture of anxiety and forced optimism. People knew what an acquisition by Omnicorp meant, but they were clinging to the hope that their leaders had secured a good deal for them. My father, Harrison Blackwood, stepped up to the podium, radiating a false paternal warmth that made my stomach churn. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice booming with manufactured confidence. "Today marks a pivotal moment in the history of Blackwood Industries, a moment of evolution and growth." He spoke for several minutes, using all the right buzzwords: synergy, innovation, forward-thinking partnership. He painted a picture of a seamless transition where Omnicorp's resources would elevate the company to new heights. It was a masterful performance, a complete and utter lie. Then, my brother Leo took the stage to discuss the financial strength of the deal. He presented slides with manipulated data, showing declining profits and fabricated market pressures to justify the sale. "This decision, while difficult, was necessary to secure our future," Leo said, his face a mask of solemn sincerity. I could see Alina in the audience, her expression a stony mask of contempt. She knew, as I did, that every number on those slides was a fiction. The final speaker was Mr. Thorne from Omnicorp. He was the picture of corporate grace, promising to honor the legacy of Blackwood Industries while steering it towards a brighter tomorrow. "We are not here to change what makes this company great," he said smoothly. "We are here to enhance it. Your jobs are secure." The lie was so bald-faced, so insulting, it was the perfect cue. "It's time," I said to David. He nodded, picked up his briefcase, and we walked towards the doors that led onto the stage. We emerged from the side door just as Mr. Thorne was wrapping up his speech. A collective gasp rippled through the auditorium. All eyes turned to us. My father's smile froze on his face. Leo's jaw went slack with disbelief. Mr. Thorne looked utterly confused. I walked calmly to the center of the stage, taking a spare microphone from the stand. David stood a few paces behind me, a formidable, silent presence. "I apologize for the interruption," I said, my voice clear and steady, amplified throughout the massive room, "but I'm afraid you've all been given some misleading information." Harrison found his voice first, his tone a furious whisper. "Abigail, what is the meaning of this? Security?" But no security guards moved. They stood at the back of the room, just as stunned as everyone else. "The meaning of this, Father," I said, turning to look him directly in the eye, "is that this sale is not happening. Blackwood Industries has not been sold, and it will not be sold." Mr. Thorne stepped forward. "I'm sorry, young lady, but a legally binding agreement has been signed. An agreement signed by a minority of shareholders," David Chen cut in, his voice ringing with legal authority. "An agreement that is now null and void. As of 9:00 a.m. this morning, an emergency injunction was filed and granted, freezing all proceedings related to this sale, pending a review of ownership." Leo finally snapped out of his shock. "What are you talking about? That's impossible. Dad and I control the voting shares." "Do you?" I asked, a cold smile touching my lips. I turned to address the confused and silent employees. "My name is Abigail Blackwood. Many of you know me. For those who don't, I am the daughter of Harrison Blackwood and the granddaughter of our founder, Theodore Blackwood. What my father and brother failed to mention is that, per the original founding partnership agreement signed by my grandfather, I am not a 10% shareholder. I am the 51% majority shareholder of this company." A wave of murmurs and whispers swept through the room. I let the statement hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "This vote to sell the company was taken without my knowledge or consent, making it legally invalid. Therefore, Mr. Thorne," I said, turning to the Omnicorp executive, "you have no deal. I suggest you consult your lawyers, who have likely already received a copy of the injunction." Thorne's face paled. He immediately turned and walked off the stage, pulling out his phone. The battle with Omnicorp was over before it even began. Now, it was time to deal with my family. But that's not all, I continued, my voice growing stronger. This wasn't just an illicit sale. This was an act of fraud. On the large screen behind me, Leo's polished presentation disappeared, replaced by the documents Alina had given me. Side-by-side comparisons of the real ledgers and the fake ones. Emails detailing the plan to undervalue company assets. Bank statements from their offshore holding company. The evidence was irrefutable and public. My father and brother have been systematically defrauding the company you all work so hard for, I declared. They were planning to sell it for a fraction of its worth while pocketing millions on the side. They weren't just selling a company, they were robbing a family. And you, I said, my voice ringing with passion as I looked out at the faces of my colleagues, are all part of that family. Harrison was apoplectic, his face purple with rage. Lies, this is slander. Is it? I countered, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. Then you'll have no problem explaining these documents to the board of directors, and perhaps the IRS and the SEC. That was the final blow. The mention of federal agencies broke them. Leo looked like he was going to be physically sick. My father stared at me, his eyes filled not just with anger, but with the dawning horror of utter defeat. He saw his legacy, his freedom, and his reputation crumbling to dust in front of hundreds of witnesses. My grandfather taught me to always think 5 moves ahead. In that moment, I realized what he truly meant. It wasn't just about strategy. It was about having the wisdom to see the truth, the patience to wait for the right moment, and the courage to act. I looked at my father and my brother, 2 disgraced men standing on a stage of their own making. Checkmate. The aftermath of the all-hands meeting was swift and decisive. The moment I uttered the word checkmate, the illusion of my father and brother's authority shattered completely. Mr. Thorne and his Omnicorp team were gone within minutes, their predatory ambitions thwarted. My father, Harrison, stood speechless at the podium, his face a mess of confusion and fury. Leo, ever the coward, simply turned and walked off the stage, unable to face the hundreds of eyes now staring at him with contempt and disbelief. David Chen formally called for an emergency meeting of the board of directors, which, as the newly revealed majority shareholder, was my right. The meeting was held an hour later in the main conference room, the very same room where I had been so coldly dismissed just a week earlier. The energy, however, could not have been more different. This time I sat at the head of the table. David was at my right, and Alina Vance, no longer just an accountant but a key witness and trusted advisor, was at my left. Harrison and Leo were compelled to attend, but they sat at the far end of the table, diminished and silent, with their hastily summoned lawyer who looked overwhelmed and deeply concerned. There was no room for argument. I presented the original partnership agreement, and David explained its ironclad legality. Then I presented the evidence of their fraud, compiled by Alina into a damningly clear report. The board members, most of whom were long-time associates who had respected my grandfather, were appalled. They had been misled just as much as I had. By the end of the meeting, the resolutions were passed unanimously, or rather, by my 51% vote, which was all that mattered. Harrison Blackwood was removed as CEO and chairman of the board, effective immediately. Leo Blackwood was terminated as CFO and stripped of all corporate duties. Both were required to resign from the board. An independent forensic accounting firm was to be hired to determine the full extent of the funds they had embezzled, with the clear implication that we would pursue full legal and financial restitution. They were escorted from the building for the final time, not with the dignity they had denied me, but under the watchful eyes of the same security team they had used to intimidate me. I didn't feel a sense of triumph watching them go. Instead, I felt a quiet, somber sense of closure. I hadn't set out to destroy my family, I had set out to save my grandfather's. The fact that the 2 goals were mutually exclusive was their tragedy, not mine. In the days that followed, I was officially installed as the new CEO and chairwoman of Blackwood Industries. My first act was to hold another all-hands meeting. This time, there was no stage, no podium. I stood on the factory floor, surrounded by the men and women who were the true heart of the company. I laid out the truth of what had happened, and I made them a promise. Blackwood Industries is not for sale, I announced, my voice echoing in the vast space. Not now, not ever. This company was built on the values of integrity, quality, and respect for its people. We lost our way, but today we find it again. This is a new beginning for all of us. The applause was thunderous, a genuine and emotional release of weeks of anxiety. I promoted Alina Vance to be my new CFO, a position she had earned 100 times over with her integrity and courage. Together, we began the difficult work of repairing the damage. We canceled the fraudulent write-downs of our assets, correcting our books to reflect the company's true, healthy valuation. We used the initial funds we recovered from my father and brother's accounts to give every single employee a long-overdue bonus as a sign of good faith and a thank you for their loyalty. Rebuilding trust was my top priority. I adopted an open-door policy, walking the factory floor every day, just as my grandfather had. I listened to the concerns of the machinists, the ideas of the engineers, and the feedback from the logistics team. We invested in new equipment, not because it looked good on a financial statement, but because it made the work safer and more efficient for our people. We reinstated the community outreach programs my grandfather had started, my father had cut, reconnecting the company to the town that had supported it for so long. As for Harrison and Leo, their fall was as complete as it was deserved. Faced with irrefutable evidence, they had little choice but to cooperate. They ended up liquidating most of their personal assets to repay the money they had stolen from the company. They avoided jail time by a narrow margin, but their reputations were ruined forever. I haven't spoken to either of them since they left the building. The family I knew was gone, and while there's a sadness in that, there is also a sense of liberation. My cage, gilded or otherwise, is gone. I am defined not by my name or my blood, but by my actions and my commitment to the legacy I now rightfully control. Blackwood Industries is thriving. We are more profitable and more innovative than ever before. But more importantly, it once again feels like a family, a real one, built on mutual respect and a shared purpose. Every time I walk the factory floor and hear that familiar hum of machinery, I feel my grandfather's presence. I know he would be proud. I didn't just save his company. I am forging a new legacy, one that honors his vision while being entirely my own.